I'm going to address these questions. And I want each of you to answer them because I'm not going to come back to them and tell you the answers. But I want you, from my remarks, to answer them yourselves. The questions are, what are the connections between energy and agriculture? Are these connections good or bad for society? And finally, how should we manage them? Now, my remarks are going to begin with a brief history of innovations in agriculture, because part of the answer to these questions lies in these innovations. The first and greatest innovation was the domestication of our crop and livestock species. And this happened in several different places around the world and at different times, but all of them were in antiquity. And each was a key development in the transition of that local society from a pastoral hunter-gatherer type society to one in which enough food, enough calories could be produced that people had leisure time. And with that leisure time, they could go to war or they could write books. And it was really that leisure time that allowed civilization to develop, because people could become more specialized in other crafts and manufacturing and tool making and so forth. So this was really a key step in agriculture, the first big step. Second was the use of irrigation. And this is almost as old. There's good records of irrigation at 6000 BC in the same area where many of our crops were first domesticated, Egypt and Mesopotamia, the river valleys. And of course, this is now very widely used. Modern agriculture would be impossible without it. You can see a map here of irrigation. It's also an area of significant risk, because as the climate changes, rainfall patterns are changing. There are a lot of mountain sources of fresh water are drying up. Of course, here in San Diego, it's an issue for us. So this is something to keep your eye on. But again, this was another very important innovation. And then we had technology, other than the first technology, which was biotechnology, the domestication of the crops. But in the early 1700s, farming technology really began to develop, but it was still not mechanized. It was still powered by our domesticated animals. Nevertheless, it experienced a great increase in efficiencies. And then the machines came along. And here's a picture of a steam tractor. This same tractor is still running. You can see it up in Vista at the Antique Tractor Museum. I saw it last weekend. But these tractors, began to replace horses and human labor. And then with the shift to fossil fuels and away from these wood-powered machines, there was the real takeoff of industrialization. And you can see a crossover here from horse to tractor power on the farms around the end of World War II. So it's been a hectic pace of technology development since then. And one of the next big steps was the development of chemical fertilizers. Of course, up until this time, the only fertilizer had been manure from animals, but that was okay because livestock were so widely used. There was plenty of manure available. But chemical fertilizers really enabled the expansion of crop intensity. And the three big ones are the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so again, these are very widely used today. And with the development of the diesel and gasoline tractors and the chemical fertilizers, we have the first coupling of agriculture or the first coupling of fuel prices to prices. And then came the Green Revolution, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And it was spearheaded by this man here, Norman Borlaug, who I had the privilege of serving on boards with for a number of years. And Norman brought all the innovations in agriculture that were coming out of American universities in the 30s and 40s, mainly to do with plant breeding and the use of these fertilizers and to some degree mechanization. And like Johnny Appleseed, he went around the world teaching people how to use these technologies and how to make modern plant breeding standard tool in their location so that the crops grown in the Philippines or India or China, that those crops, not just American crops, benefited from this new knowledge. And it had an extraordinary impact around the world. And this just illustrates a few examples. What you can see in the green lines in each of these is the price of that particular commodity crop, and then in yellow is the yield per unit land for that crop. So you can see that as the yields went up, because on the same piece of land, the productivity increased due to the breeding and these other technologies, that caused the price of the crop to go down. So this Green Revolution technology was decoupling the price of food from the price of fuel. So now we've got contrary forces. Unfortunately, since this time, this shows the late 90s, what we've found is that the coupling between food and fuel has reversed this price trend. And I'll go into that a little more in a few minutes. I should also mention that at the time of the Green Revolution, agricultural technologies broadly were being further developed, and that included major improvements in the efficiency of animal production for meat. Another key innovation was the development of pesticides. And the primary categories are herbicides that control weeds, insecticides that obviously control insects, fungicides to control molds. There are a few other classes, but these are the big ones. But these are all made from petroleum. So the use of these, while it really improved the productivity of the land, again, it was coupling the price of food to the price of fuel. But it all worked up through the end of the last century. And as you can see here, agriculture has been extraordinarily successful, not only in giving us safe, abundant, and food in great variety, but in making it more affordable, in contrast to healthcare, for example. So as you can see, now today in the United States, the average percent of income people spend on food is only about 10%. Now that's not true around the world, although it's come down for everyone, but not to the same degree. Here you can see a little more updated slide. The cost is fallen even lower. But in other countries, it's still a large fraction of people's income. And in Egypt, for example, nearly half of people's income is spent just on getting enough food to live. So we continue to benefit from our university research and our biotechnology industries, which are through their innovations, are keeping food as a percent of our income low. Now, one of the benefits that we're seeing from agriculture, and I touched on, is that we have all of these wonderful foods available to us year-round. And it's not just us. You'd see the same basic array of produce in markets almost anywhere in the world that you go today. So agriculture has been extraordinary in extending the food variety, both in space and in time. But once again, that ability to have access involves a lot of transportation fuel to move foods around the globe. So this benefit that we're enjoying, again, is coupling food price to fuel price. And then the last big coupler is biofuel. So there are a lot of good reasons to use biofuels, but one of the consequences of this is that when a crop becomes dual use, it's sold into whatever market will pay the highest price for it. And so as the use of corn in the production of ethanol biofuel increases, that puts a price pressure on corn itself. So again, this use of crops for biofuel couples the price of food to the price of fuel. So to reiterate these innovations, we started as hunter-gatherers, and then we had the domestication of crops and livestock, industrialization of farming, and the food process, which includes manufacturing and transportation. We had plant breeding, and then petroleum came in to mechanize the whole industry, and then the chemical inputs of fertilizers and pesticides, and finally global distribution and dual use of our crops. So as you can see, many of these are coupling the prices of energy and food, and some work against that coupling.